Welcome to OLC. Hear me? Welcome to OLC 4.0, Term 2A. This is class 23, and we're going to be looking at assignment 35, questions number 1 to 3, and looking at how to do quotation marks today. This is Jillian Percy, and welcome to Thursday's class. If you have any work to hand in, please send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Please include your full name, course name, assignment number, and name, and label if there is a rough and a good draft. If you need to reach me about an assignment, send a message to jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. My Facebook and YouTube address are the same, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. And the office phone number is 1-800-667-3703. My extension is 2211. If you have to take a photograph of an assignment, please send it as an attachment. When you put it in the body of the email, it's kind of hard to print off and it doesn't show up properly on the computer. Okay, today's work. Today we're going to learn about the rules of how to format quotation marks for dialogue correctly, apply our knowledge of the rules in order to edit a paragraph that is missing punctuation, understand the main point of a news article, put a news article in chronological order, state our opinion on a news article, follow the format of an opinion paragraph, support our opinion with evidence or details, and write good opening or closing sentences that state our opinion. So there's a lot on store today. For some reason, assignment 35 is a really big one. Okay, so they kind of go through in the unit a little bit of a review of different types of writing that uses dialogue. So I'm just going to kind of follow along with that with just a little tiny bit, but we're not going to do all of it because it's in the unit. You can read it if you want it, right? There are many different types of nonfiction or factual writing that include dialogue or direct quotes of what people say. Some types of writing for this would include biographies and autobiographies, newspaper articles, interviews, poetry, informational texts, historical records, and accounts. And these will follow the exact same rules about quotations and dialogue as in fictional writing. There are also many types of fictional writing, creative writing about imaginary events that include dialogue or direct quotes of what people say. So some types of fictional writing would include things like legends or myths, short stories, novellas or novels in many different genres like mysteries, thrillers, horror, romances, fantasy, science fiction, or historical fiction. So the word dialogue comes from the Greek language, in case you're curious. Dia means through and logos means words. So a dialogue is a form of writing that consists of a conversation between two or more people. The most obvious example of dialogue is a play or like a TV show, when the story gets told through the conversation of the characters rather than a narrator. There are specific rules for the punctuation of a dialogue, and the pages that follow will give you an overview of the rules, as well as examples of using punctuation with dialogue. So the rules about quotations in speech, those are followed regardless of whether the words are made up, fictional, or whether they're real. And they are also followed regardless of what kind of writing format you're working with, other than plays and certain types of interviews will use colons rather than quotation marks to indicate speech. But that's not going to come up particularly in this course. So, but just so you're aware if you see that difference. The big thing is, along with quotation marks, there's usually something called a tag. And the tag tells us who is speaking, and it tells us how they are speaking. And tags can come at the beginning, before the quote, in the middle of the quote, or at the end of the quote. So I've kind of put some examples here so you can see how the exact same tag would look depending on whether it was at the beginning or in the middle or at the end. And I've sort of put the changes in red, which is easier to see with the letters. With the punctuation, they're so small, it's a little bit harder to see. So at the beginning, if the tag comes first, you're going to capitalize the first letter in the tag because it's the first letter in the entire sentence. Then you would write, so like you have the pronoun or the noun, he, she, mom, the doctor, whatever. And then how they talked, yelled, whispered, shouted, muttered. And after that, you put a little comma. and then you would introduce the quotation mark, which I'll show you in a minute. If it's in the middle, you don't need to put a capital on the beginning of the tag because it's in the middle of a sentence, so it no longer needs the capital, okay? There'd be quotations in front, there'd be quotations behind. At the end, you also have no capital because, again, this part would still be in the middle of the sentence and it's not going to need a capital there. You do put a period at the end, whereas in the middle, you'd still be using the comma, okay? So the beginning is the only spot where the tag gets a capital letter, and the end is the only spot where you use a period at the very end of it. That's only if the sentence would end in a period anyways, right? Okay, that's just kind of a generic part. And then we're going to kind of get down into some of the more nitty gritty stuff in a minute because there's a lot of little finicky stuff about quotations for some reason. Sometimes we're reporting actual speech, whether real or imaginary, and all the rules about quotations will apply in those situations. And this is what they sometimes call direct quotations. But occasionally in writing, we report what somebody else said in a very general way, rather than as an exact quote of the actual words. And when we do this, we don't need quotation marks, and we don't need to worry about following any of these dialogue rules. That's what's called an indirect quotation. And usually it means that someone's reporting what somebody else said in a general way. So an indirect quote might be something like, well, Dad got mad and said we needed to play ball outside. Now, this isn't Dad speaking. This is somebody else telling you what Dad said. It doesn't need the quotations. If this were exact speech, it might just be more like, Dad said, go play outside. Another example of an indirect quote, we don't need to wait for Sarah because she said she wasn't coming. And again, somebody else is reporting on what Sarah said. If this were exact speech, it might say, Sarah said, I'm not coming. Okay. Just so you know, there was kind of an exception to the rule. So, very first rule, this is slightly different than what's in the unit because I found some of the unit a little bit confusing. So I tried to make it a little bit easier. There's no disagreement. I just maybe phrase things a little bit differently, okay? So number one, use quotation marks to begin and end a direct quotation, but not an indirect quote. We just talked about that. The first word inside a quote is capitalized. So here, for example, it's the word I, which is always capitalized, but even if it wasn't, because it's the first word he's saying, it's kind of like the first word of a sentence. So we give it a capital as well, so it stands out. If a tag comes at the beginning of the sentence, it is capitalized, like right here, and then followed with a comma before the quotation starts. So here's an example. Jack said, I win. If a tag comes in the middle of the sentence, it does not get capitalized. Oh, and I reversed, so I'm gonna, now in this case, I'm gonna put it back to normal here. Jack said, there's a capital, but only because it's a name. I win, Jack said, you lose. If a tag comes at the end of a sentence, it is not capitalized, then it's followed by the period. I win, said Jack. This is all exactly what we talked about, right? And you can see, oh, this is the one thing, well, we'll talk about it in a second. Hang on. If the quoted speech ends in a period, but the whole sentence isn't done, we just use a comma. So like example here, I want hot dogs, comma. If you were just saying that without the tag, you'd put a period right there because the sentence is finished. But because the sentence is still finishing, they don't want to have a period here and then a period here, because then it looks like she said is a sentence all by itself. It's kind of confusing. So they substitute a comma there instead of a period. However, if it's an exclamation point or a question mark, we still use those at the place because they're expressing a certain kind of emotion or type of sentence that we need to know about. Can we have hot dogs? Question mark, she said. I hate hot dogs! Exclamation point, she said. All right, so then you can see for all of these, there's no comma outside of the quotation marks, okay? We just put the tag and then the period. When the end of the quotation is also the end of the sentence, like when it comes to here at the end, the period falls inside the quotation marks. So you see there's a period and then the quotations rather than out here. okay? We don't do that. And we don't do both. We don't need one on the inside and one on the outside. Just one will do fine. It ends up just kind of doing double duty. It ends his speech, it ends the entire sentence, okay? It's also true if you have like a question mark or an exclamation point, it just ends up, again, doing double duty. It ends that person's talking and it ends the entire sentence. Now, occasionally, the person, this is kind of tricky. Somebody may be quoting somebody and they may have a different emotion going on than the person they're quoting. So this is kind of one of those unusual things. This is not going to come very often, but it does come up. You might see it. When the original sentence ends in a different type of punctuation mark than the quotation is using, simply put it after the quotation marks. Put the correct punctuation for the speech itself inside the punctuation marks. So here's an example, like this person can't believe that this person said something. So they're asking a question, but they're quoting somebody else who was angry. Did she really tell you, get out of here? So the get out of here is excited and angry, but the entire thing here is the question. I can't believe you said, my real name is James Bond. And so he ended with a period, because that's how he was finishing speaking, but he's kind of like excited or a little bit sarcastic here. Again, this is a really rare occurrence. You're not going to have to worry about this most times. Both parts of a divided quotation are enclosed in quotation marks. That's talking about when the tag is in the middle, right? The first word of the second part does not have a capital unless it begins a new sentence. So it says, this soup, the elder said, tastes just like my gookums. Now, because this is just the beginning of the sentence, a continuation of the sentence, it doesn't need a capital letter. It just continues on with him talking. Quotes within a quote, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about up here. If you need to have one character directly quoting another character, then use double quotes for the main dialogue and single quotes for the quote within a quote. And then he said, this is your last chance around here, Jimmy. What a jerk, he said. So see the single apostrophe or single quote? That's what the other person is saying. And then the double quote is showing you what this main person is saying. Again, that's a unusual situation. It does show up. And I know this is really nitpicky, and it's because they're about to have you do an assignment where you have to put all the punctuation in, which is kind of nitpicky, and I'm sorry. I didn't write it, but it is definitely what we're doing today. When you write dialogue, begin a new paragraph whenever the speaker changes. That way, even if there's no tag, we can tell who is talking. So for example, sit down, she said, let's talk. Are you going to do this every day? What? What do you mean, what? So each time a new line starts, someone else is talking. So here, the girl's talking, someone else is responding, and then she's talking back. They're taking turns, basically. You'll see that really commonly in novels. They don't always put a tag for every single piece of dialogue if there's going to be a lot of speech at once. Use a pair of dashes to indicate an unfinished statement or a question. It may get continued later or it may not. In other words, the speaker was talking, but they got cut off. Someone interrupted them. First of all, he said, if you can learn a simple trick, son, you'll get along better with all kinds of folks. You can never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Huh? Until you walk 2 moons in his moccasins. Now here, when he was in the middle of his sentence, this other person cut him off. So, huh? And so then they put another dash at the beginning of this to show that he's still saying the end of this sentence. If he just quit and started a new sentence, they wouldn't need the dash. But like this is an end dash, and this is a beginning dash showing you that he's starting up again. Again, that's an unusual situation. That doesn't happen a lot. So this is a really awkward one. When writing only a part of a quoted sentence, like if you're doing a research essay and you're quoting somebody famous, don't begin the quotation with a capital letter unless the person that you're quoting capitalized it, or it's the first word in your sentence. Sometimes you would also use an ellipse. Remember, ellipse is the dot, 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 to show that it's not a complete sentence. So Robert Checkwich admitted he had not found many novels that were based in First Nation communities. So this is obviously the middle of a sentence. So they didn't bother putting a capital there. It would look a little bit odd. It might be confusing. Now, I tried to change it around, but it changes the meaning of the sentence so much. So don't look at the meaning, but if the quote was the beginning, then I would have put a capital, even though here that doesn't necessarily make any sense. Okay, so here's our actual assignment. Number 35. First exercise is 6 marks. So I just want to point out, there is a lot of punctuation to do here, but it's only worth 6. So even if you had a hard time with this assignment, it's not really going to ding you too bad. It's just practice doing dialogue, because a lot of times if it's been a while since you've been in school, maybe a long time since you've had to worry about quotation marks, okay? Now, they haven't just forgotten quotation marks. They've also not capitalized some things, and they've left out punctuation like commas and things like that. I think there's missing question marks and exclamation points. So I'm going to kind of read it through, and with my voice, try and show you a little bit about where I think punctuation should be. And then we're going to do kind of a practice run at this kind of thing. Not this exact one, but something similar. So you kind of see what I mean about all the things that are missing. And they started the first 2 lines for us. Hey, Kelly, Frank said. What's up? Hey, Frank. I'm just sitting around hanging out, she replied. That's cool. Did you hear about what happened to Carrie? He asked. No, what happened? She asked. Well, he said, I heard she got expelled. For what? She exclaimed. She brought in a knife or something like that, he replied. I bet somebody turned her in, Kelly said. Probably, Frank said. So you got any plans for Friday? Yes, Kelly said. Why? Do you want to offer me something better? I don't know what you have planned, he said, but I was thinking about you and me getting together. And doing what exactly? Kelly asked. I don't know. We could hang out, Frank said. If you don't know, then why did you ask? She asked. Try again when you think of something better to say. So they've left off a whole bunch of punctuation, and they're going to want you to put the punctuation in. Yeah, so end punctuation, periods, question marks, and exclamation points, commas, punctuation marks, and they have left out the capitals at the beginning of a sentence or the first word in a quote. So you're going to have to be mindful of all those things, catch them, and correct them. So here is an example, much shorter, where we can kind of walk through it. Now you can see they've left the names capitalized. John said, let's go to the mall. So basically always look for the tag first, kind of is helpful. John said, and I always put a comma when the tag's at the front. John said, let's go to the mall. So let's go to the mall is his words. So I'm going to put quotation mark there and quotation mark there. And I need some end punctuation. I'm just going to use a period. Now, normally I just put a period like that, but because there's quotation marks, I want to make sure it's inside the quotation marks so that it does double duty. It ends the quote and it ends the whole sentence like that. No way, said Peter. I don't have any money. Okay, well, said Peter is my tag. And I'm going to put a comma there because this one is still talking. And there's a quotation. Oh, wait, hang on. There we go. Okay, quotation mark. I don't have any money, end quotation. Same thing, I would put the period here, but I want it to do double duty. So instead I'm going to put it inside quotation marks. Oops. Now I skipped over the first part of the sentence. He's talking here as well. No way, he's saying, right? So I've got to put quotation marks to start and turn that into a capital letter. He's talking, no way. Now I could make that a period. I could turn it into an exclamation point, like he's upset. And I use the quotation marks. It doesn't need any other punctuation. We can just window shop, said John. All right, so he's talking here. The whole week in just window shop is him talking. So I'm going to start with a quotation mark. And then I need to fix this. This small letter needs to become a capital. And we can just window shop. Here he finishes talking. So normally I could just put a period here, but because we're in the middle of our sentence, we're going to substitute a comma and do our quotation marks. And then here, which is our true end of the sentence, we're going to use a period. Let's go down to the skateboard park instead, said Peter. We can go to the mall tomorrow when I get paid. So this whole part, let's go down to the skateboard park instead. That's Peter talking. So I'm going to put a quotation mark there. And here. And he doesn't sound excited. He's not asking a question. So I'm just going to put a comma there. Now, because they put a capital here, I'm going to assume that this is the end of this and this is a new one. You could treat it as one in the middle. There is some room for interpretation. So if I think something is ambiguous and can be done two ways, then it's fine. I will accept either way. I'm going to put my period here to show the sentence is done, double duty, and my quotation marks outside of the period. And then last one, John said, okay, let me grab my skateboard from the garage. So John said, comma, and I'm going to use my quotation marks. And again, I'm going to use my double duty period here and my quotation marks there. So here is an example. So it's kind of finicky. Sometimes people ask me, can I just do it right on the page? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Doesn't bother me. Okay, looking at exercise number 2. Exercise number 2 is worth 6 marks. In your unit, there was a news report called Anishinaabeg Received Complaints Over HST. And we're going to read that in a second, and then we're going to answer the following questions. The main idea, what is the main idea of this news report? Phrase it in one sentence if possible. So don't just list the topic like it's about HST, because obviously it is. What's the main idea about the topic? So if I said the Avengers movie is about the Avengers, I would just be telling you the topic. Instead, I should say something like the Avengers movie is about how a group of superheroes who enjoy working alone learn to work together as a team to fight the forces of evil that would overcome them individually. Okay, so let's look at the news report. The title is Anishinaabeg Received Complaints Over HST. Thursday, September 2nd, 2010. Rick Garrick, Wawate News. The Anishinaabeg Nation is calling for retailers to honor point-of-sale tax exemptions after community members reported being gouged by companies. Even after the province has sent out notices informing businesses that they must honor the rights of our citizens on and off reserve to tax exemption, we are hearing stories of companies trying to gouge First Nations customers, said Grand Council Chief Patrick Madaby. These retailers are now breaking their own government's laws, as well as ignoring First Nation rights. Anishinaabe Nation representatives said only one case was reported of a business not honoring the tax exemption. Most businesses throughout northwestern Ontario had been honoring the tax exemption. Ontario's 8% PST and the federal 5% GST were harmonized into the 13% HST July 1st, with a goal of providing a competitive advantage to businesses within the province. Although First Nation citizens had to pay the HST since July 1st, a last-minute agreement was reached with the federal and provincial governments by First Nation organizations and groups. The agreement said that First Nation citizens in Ontario are exempt from the 8% provincial portion of the 13% HST. Whew. The agreement also called for retailers to honor this tax exemption effective September 1st. Madaby encouraged community members to call their local member of provincial parliament to provide them with the name of any business refusing to respect the point of sale exemption to the 8% provincial sales tax. That was part of the deal we negotiated with Ontario. They accepted responsibility for ensuring that all businesses in the province complied with their tax regime. Matabe said, "We showed Ontario that we were prepared to take to the street to fight for our rights. We are also prepared to fight for our rights in stores and malls if necessary." First Nation citizens can apply for refunds of the taxes they paid throughout July and August by filling out refund applications, which were to be made available after August 1st at Band Council offices, online at the Ministry of Revenue website at www.ontario.ca/tax change, or by calling 1-866-668-8297. Refund applications, which need to be submitted between September 1st to November 1st, 2010, must contain the original sales receipts and a photocopy of both sides of the status Indian card, or in the case of Indian bands and councils, a letter from the band or council certifying the consumption of qualifying off-reserve supplies for band activities. So that's the original news report, and they want to know what's the main idea? What are they talking about? Phrase it in one sentence, okay? And then number 2 is where a lot of people get confused. So I'm going to take some time explaining it because it mixes people up a little bit. It says, go through the story to determine the sequence of events. That is the order in which the events leading up to the news story actually happened. And you may be surprised to see they're not reported in chronological order. Often when we summarize an event, we put things in chronological order and we tell it this happened first and then this happened next. And then after that, this happened. But remember that news reports don't follow that kind of chronological format. They follow the format of most important first, then next important, and then least important. And so that means a story and the events may get kind of jumbled up, which definitely happens in this story. And I think actually kind of makes it a little bit confusing to read. So what they want you to do is go back and kind of unjumble it, figure out what happened first, what happened next, and kind of go through and report it in order. So I'm going to kind of start off with one to sort of, oh, actually, you know what? I got a sample one. Okay. The big thing is look at the dates, right? If you follow the dates, it will make sense. We talked about this. Yep. Look for the earliest date mentioned in the article. Keep going by listing the different events until you get to the last or the farthest date along the timeline. Now, occasionally, one thing that can be tricky is sometimes they'll give you a range of times, like between this and this. Use your best judgment where to put those. Okay. I'm lenient on those. I don't care because it's a judgment call and I'm just trusting you to use your judgment. That's all. So here's an example from an imaginary news story. And remember that we're going to put the events in the order they happened, not the order they're told in the story. Tensions high at Tekka Tool and Die, March 21st, 2024. Fights broke out yesterday between the workers on strike at Tekka Tool and Die and scabs attempting to cross the picket line. This follows an announcement last week issued on Monday, March 14th, that the company was moving on and would be hiring replacement workers. The workers have been on strike since October 15th, 2023. They have been without a valid contract since January 31st, 2023. While the union and management met several times to negotiate a new contract, discussions came to a halt October 3rd, 2023, due to the union's rejection of the latest proposal from the management of Tekka Tool and Die. Okay, so here they talked about the most important part that happened, but that's really kind of the end of what happened. A lot of the stuff happened that happened at the beginning, they're mentioning later on in the story. And that can be a little bit confusing if you're not used to that format and haven't really noticed it before. So I go back through and look at the dates. January 31st, 2023, that was when the workers' contract expired. They talked about that right here. Okay, so we've got that one. January 23rd, all the way to October 3rd, contract negotiations go on. That was the part they were talking about right here. right? They didn't give you the beginning, but January 31st would be the beginning, right? Okay. Oh, did I underline it? No, hang on a second. Okay. And then on October 3rd, the union rejected the contract. So that covers this part. Okay, that was the third thing that happened. Then October 15th, the workers go on strike. And you can see it's all over the place because they're talking about it in terms of importance rather than in terms of chronology. Then on March 14th was an announcement that the company was now planning to hire replacement workers, which are sometimes called scabs. And then that led to the very first thing that they reported, which is actually the last thing that happened, that fights broke out on March 21st. So when you're going through this, you're going to have to be looking for that. Look for the dates and see where they fit in and put them back in order, okay? I know it's a little bit unusual, but it's just get you to notice the um, the difference in format in a news report and how that affects things. Okay, so now we're looking at question number 3 in exercise 35. Now, sometimes people race through this because they're on the third question and they're getting tired and they're like, oh, I don't want to write very much anymore. But it's worth 10 marks. So take your time to write a good opinion. If you have to like put the work away and tackle it again on another day so you've got some fresh brain power for doing it, that's fine. But don't just hand me in like 3 lines and then be surprised because I will just send it back and say, please redo. Okay. Here's the actual question. Write an opinion paragraph based on the information provided in the news report. Notice that as you read the news report again to get ideas, the news report itself is free of opinion. It's only the quotations from the people involved that contain opinions. Use the organizational chart, checklist, and rubric to guide your writing. It's really important that you don't just summarize the article, okay? Exercise number 2 that we just finished really does kind of summarize things. You don't need to do that again. What we want to do here is give your opinion, your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas about what's happening in the news article. So here's the difference. A summary, the primary purpose is to prioritize and summarize the information in another article or story, which we basically just did. Now we're asking you to explain what you think about that information or the events that you've read about. A summary should stick only to the facts and the information that are actually right there in the text. An opinion should make connections between the text and your own experiences or events that have occurred in the real world. A summary will only include the most important facts and might not mention examples or details. An opinion will definitely want to use examples and details from the text, your life, your thoughts, and your feelings to help support your opinion. So we've basically already done the summary. Now we're working on opinion. It's a little bit harder. It's kind of a step up. I think I'm going to come back to that actually. Hang on a second. So the format of an opinion paragraph is much like most paragraphs. There's an opening sentence and it's going to state your opinion on the topic, not just the topic. So you wouldn't just say, I'm going to write about the HST tax. You're going to write something more like, I think the HST tax and, retailers refusing to redeem it was, and you tell me what you thought about it. Then you would write 3 to 5 sentences in the body of the paragraph, the main part of the paragraph, giving me your reasons or your arguments for your opinion and with supporting examples or details. And then your closing sentence would restate your opinion that you save up top. Sometimes it might summarize your arguments briefly. The most important part of this opinion paragraph is this middle part with the body paragraphs because you need to state your reasons for opinion. And a lot of times just in conversation, we kind of have gotten used to just stating our opinion. I think this, I think that, without really basing it on any specific reason, right? But in writing, we're kind of held accountable more and we have to give reasons. So an opinion paragraph sort of forces us to provide evidence or examples to support our opinions. And if you haven't done this very often, it can be a little bit tricky to do it for the first time. Okay. So here's an example. Here's my original article, and here's my opinion on it. And looking at this, I need to think about hang on. What is this really about? Well, what it's really about is the company has decided, yeah, we're not going to negotiate with them anymore. We're just going to never mind about that and hire new people who didn't sign that contract, who that we don't have to negotiate with. And that naturally caused problems because it's called strike union breaking or strike breaking. And a fight broke out between the original workers and the new workers the company was trying to hire. Right. So, what do I think about that? Right. That's what I'm going to be talking about. And why do I think that? Like, do I think it was a good thing or a bad thing? And if I think it was a bad thing, why do I think it was a bad thing? So, here's my opinion about the article. And you can see I don't spend a lot of time um, re-explaining the original article because I don't need to. It's right there. I'm telling you what I think about the events rather than just re-listing all the events. So, in my opinion, it is important to respect unions by honoring their strike protests. The staff at this tool and die shop have continued to work even though they didn't have a valid contract safeguarding their rights, which shows their good faith. Replacement workers will not have these rights either, and they are making this workplace less safe for everyone by ignoring this fact. The original workers did not go on strike right away, but only after discussions came to a halt. Possibly the company should get back to the negotiating table if they want to end the strike, rather than trying to break down the union by hiring non unionized workers. Every time non unionized workers cross a picket line, they are trading the short term benefits of an immediate but lower paycheck for the longer time benefits of a negotiated contract that would spell out clearly what rights workers have to breaks, sick leave, pay, and grievances. This strengthens the management position and allows them to treat the next batch of workers with less respect for less money because the workers have already made it clear that they won't support each other by unionizing. While the fight at the picket line is unfortunate, I don't feel the striking workers are to blame, but rather the scabs who attempted to cross the picket line and help break the union. So I just wanted to point out this is not about what I do and don't believe. I'm just trying to show you how to state an opinion. And you can see I'm bringing in a lot of connections to the real world. I'm bringing in my experiences, what I understand about unions, what I've seen happen. So, like, I could have said, in one shop that I know of after this happened, initially they hired them on at a certain high rate to get them to come in. And then the moment the a certain amount of time had gone by, they lowered the pay and there was no real way to stop it because they didn't have a contract. So this is going to involve all sorts of opinion, argument, examples, and that kind of thing. And that's what we're wanting to see when you're looking at this article about the HST and retailers possibly refusing to honor that redemption. Okay. So some sample sentences that help support your ideas. Here's some examples of how they might get phrased, okay? Because sometimes it can be hard to get started. I think that something because, and you give your reason. I am upset by something since you'd explain your reason. I agree with something because, and you tell me your reasons. I disagree with this idea because, and give me your argument. Instead, I think they should have, and you give me your alternate idea. An alternate way to handle this might have been, and again, give me your creative idea there. So in this kind of writing, you're often going to be using compound or complex sentences because you're trying to link two ideas, your opinion plus your reason. So coordinating conjunctions can do that. For example, for or so. So example, I believe, that's my opinion, that people need unions to help combat unfairness in the workplace. So I wouldn't want to cross a picket line to get a quick job, right? So I'm giving my opinion and I'm giving the reason for it. Another example would be unions were invented for there is power in workers united that cannot be achieved by a worker on his own. Now I'm going to point out as I'm doing this, this is not exactly an opinion. It's probably a bit of a summary, and you maybe would have to know some history to be able to summarize that way. But I know that I have, students of all different ages who have all different levels of awareness of things. You have to just bring what you know about the world to your writing, especially in an opinion article, right? It's all about what you know. And we all know different things, and that's okay. So you can also use subordinating conjunctions, right? Remember, those are like where you have a dependent clause and an independent clause, because there's a lot of those that help explain cause and effect really well, which is a great words to use when you're trying to argue your opinion. Because, due to, since, as, provided that, unless. So here's some examples of using those kind of statements here. I disagree with this statement because I think it ignores what really happens in these situations. I believe that this action, whatever it is wrong, since it will result in an overall negative effect on the workplace. I feel that this may cause more problems than they realize, as management will soon realize they can take advantage of these scabs more easily. It is okay to take this job if you are desperate, provided that you understand you're throwing away your rights. Here it's a conditional one. So would unless. These ones would be conditional. So would if, or even if. Right. So some of these are cause and effect. I should put that here. Or explain conditions. Sorry, I know it went really small. I'll pick it up in a second. It's one of the hazards of using these things. There we go. I'm just going to make that kind of obvious that it's the headline there and not another word. Okay. So these are the kind of sentence structures that you're going to see in your opinion paragraph. Take your time, work on that. I don't think it actually calls for you to hand in a rough copy and a good copy. You probably still want to do one in order to do good writing, but I think I only need to see the final copy, okay? You want to use examples effectively in your paragraph, and it can be a challenge, but sometimes an argument is a lot easier to understand or can be more persuasive if you're giving an example that supports your statement. It can help people move beyond the abstract words and start to think about the real world impact of words and actions. I believe unions are important because they help protect workers' jobs when management may be upset with them. For example, one friend of mine turned down her manager when he wanted to date her. When she said no, he decided to fire her and claimed she had been late to work too much. She did not have a union to help her fight this unfair action. Later on, when she worked in a unionized business and she had a supervisor who was harassing her, she was able to make a complaint to the union and get him to stop bothering her without losing her job. Situations like this are exactly why unions came to have so much importance. This is an imaginary example, by the way, but I'm giving you my example because they help protect workers' jobs. So I'm giving you my opinion. They help protect people's jobs. And then I'm giving you an example of a situation where it might help protect the job, right? In a union, the worker has specific rights and the boss can't just unilaterally fire you because you don't want to have relationship with them, right? So that's an example of using it, providing an example effectively to help support your argument. All right, closing statements. Writing an effective closing statement is a really important part of a good opinion paragraph. It's kind of your last chance to strengthen your opinion and restate your arguments very briefly. So for example, these 3 reasons, blank, 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 are why I support having unions in the workplace. I support the workers who are striking, even if they got aggressive, because they are more experienced and know how the union has been helping them, blank, blank, and blank. By the way, I don't actually support aggression. I'm just giving you an example, right? So anytime you're doing an opinion article, you're stating your point of view and your reasons for it. not just restating facts, but talking about our feelings and ideas. So what is the big issue in this article on the new HST tax? Well, the big issue is basically that the chiefs want a concession that only the federal and not the provincial part of the tax would apply to First Nations consumers. But some store owners, or maybe only one, it's kind of a little bit ambiguous there, were not honoring this change and were not exempting that tax. So they were forcing the First Nation customer to pay tax that they weren't really supposed to have to pay. What do you think of that? Do you think that's right? Do you think that's wrong? State your reasons for why you think it's right or wrong, and give examples or details, if you can, that would help to support your ideas. Okay. So we're talking about the issue, not just restating what happened. Okay. So remember that the outline for an opinion paragraph, you start with your opinion, give your first argument and a supporting example, second argument with a supporting example, third argument with a supporting example, and then your conclusion. Okay. Here is an example of a rubric that I would use to mark an opinion paragraph. This looks more complicated than it is. Basically, here are the categories: knowledge of opinion, paragraph format and of the topic, critical and creative thinking skills, communication of ideas and information in writing, looking at purpose, audience, tone, style, application of required language conventions and editing work, grammar, usage, spelling, and punctuation, and application of the writing process, evidence of revising and editing. So I want to point out, like, some people get really worried. They're like, oh, I'm a terrible speller. Does that mean I'm going to fail? No, because spelling's only one thing I'm looking at, right? Um, I didn't quite handle the paragraph format. Okay, well, that's kind of important, but it's still only one part. I'm looking at all these different things and then kind of seeing where the marks land. So if you really didn't handle it at all well, or just kind of skipped it, like sometimes people will hand me in a rough copy that's got like 2 sentences and it's clear they didn't spend any time brainstorming. Well, then you didn't use the writing process very well. So you wouldn't get a pass for that. That would be a fail for that part, right? So these areas are all doing these particular things limited. Extremely limited understanding of the format of the topic. Extremely limited ability in using critical and creative writing skills. Very limited clarity and ability. Very limited accuracy and effectiveness. Uses the writing process with very limited skills. Then we're looking at D level. D level, it may be limited. In other words, it's showing a little bit, but maybe not as much as would be expected. Okay. And then C level is it's showing some areas it's you've got, in some areas there's kind of some things missing, right? Anything past a D, D and up is still a pass. Okay. B is considered the provincial standard. B shows a good understanding. You're often doing it. You're usually doing it. There's some minor areas, but mainly you seem to have the idea, basically. And then the A level is very high ability, high knowledge. Things are very thorough, very well explained, very well understood, excellent conventions, excellent use of the writing process. Okay. So I just kind of wanted to show you, we have got a minute or two. So let's say you showed great understanding of the topic. I'm going to kind of fill this in and show you what I mean. Like, so, okay, so I think you did a great job of showing me you understood the topic and you had good paragraph format. I also thought you had pretty good ability using your critical and creative writing skills. Happy with that too. There was some clarity and ability issues. Like there's a few parts I was kind of confused what you meant and I couldn't quite understand you. So there's slightly lower marks there. Use the required conventions. Well, this particular person, oh, they had a lot of trouble with their spelling and with their grammar, and they kind of lost a lot of marks for that. However, they did do a good job with the writing process. They obviously did brainstorming. They obviously did revising. And I would say over here, they used the writing process with considerable skills. Okay, so you can see of my categories, generally this person is working at a B level, but there are some issues that they need to kind of clarify. So I would usually, like, it depends on what this was out of. Can't think of what it was out of 5, right? So probably each one of these would get 2 marks. I would go through and give marks for each one of these and kind of add it up and see what we've got. Sometimes it's really obvious that all it's going to do is kind of drop it. This D is not going to take everything over, right? They're not going to get a D just because of poor spelling. You're probably going to end up with something between a 65 and a 70 because that's where most of your marks are landing. Okay. So don't stress out too much. This is one of those things people really worry about is their spelling and their grammar. And I do look at it and I do mark it, right? Like I show you how to make those corrections because I want you to know that. And it does affect your marks a little bit, but you would never, ever fail because the grammar or spelling weren't quite good. Okay. So I just wanted to reassure people that worry about that because I know it's probably one of the most common things people mention to me. Let's see, today is Thursday. So Monday, we'll take a look at part 4 because part 4 is kind of a biggie. It's another news report, which takes a little while to set up. If you're having any trouble with assignments, please let me know. Does anyone have any questions before I close the class? No? Okay, well, thank you for joining us today, and I hope assignments are going well, and I'll talk to people later.